Well, hello. My name is Anngelle Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Welcome back. Looking forward to seeing everyone Thursday, that's November 9th, off Cabot, Beverly, Massachusetts. Our first live crime night together. It is linked at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Tickets are available. And this is one of many more events that I am planning to do. My background is largely in radio and marketing and events. I plan an annual music festival, so this stuff comes a little bit easier for me. My name is Anngelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. This is a true crime, local history, and storytelling podcast. I write about crimes. I set the scene, I connect story themes, and I talk about the things that happened here in Massachusetts and New England. This episode is about gun violence and mental health and mass murder, a terrorized community, and trauma. Please listen with care. This is episode 52. We go to Lewiston, Maine, where a local man opened fire on two businesses. The largest mass casualty event in Maine's history. It left 18 people dead and 13 injured. The actions of this one man traumatized an entire state and region. I'm happy to surprise you with a second episode in the same week. My intentions were much different when I first set out to cover these topics, but there was so much information for each story, Gardner and Lewiston, Maine, that they really deserved their own episodes. In the second half of this episode, I talked to Bernadette. Bernadette, the host and creator of the podcast called Murderific, which is currently on hiatus, and I always say, nudge, nudge, maybe she'll be back. Maybe she will. Bernadette is a native of Southern Maine and lives in the area where all of this took place, the Lewiston, Lisbon, Auburn, Bowdoin area. We talk about the case, particularly the impact on the community. Now, in episode 51, I tell the story of Brianne Pennington, a young mother of four who was killed in her home in Gardner, Massachusetts, just 3 days before the events of Lewiston, Maine. Her husband, who is wanted for her murder, is still at large. So New England was experiencing a few manhunts. Aaron Pennington remains on the run. We don't know whether he is alive or if he is dead, much like the Robert Card case before he was ultimately found. New England has experienced a great deal of terrorizing moments as of late, and we are continuing to learn more information about each case, and it is certain that new things will be learned after this episode airs. While none of this makes any sense, we remain stunned by the events in Lewiston, Maine on October 25th, 2023. We need to be shocked and saddened and disgusted because we cannot be a society that becomes desensitized by things like this. And as much as I would like to say it won't happen again, it will. All we have is hope that it's not us or someone we love. The shooter, we have come to learn, was known to authorities. Robert Card, 40 years old, of Bowdoin, Maine. He did not have a criminal record. On his criminal history, there is one charge for DUI. Dating back to 2007, there was a massive statewide manhunt to find him. The man responsible for killing 18 people in 2 locations in Lewiston, Maine, on October 25th. An arrest affidavit that was unsealed this week suggested he had more businesses in his sights that were close to where he lived. Reports say he had experienced a bad breakup and a decline in mental health just before he targeted a bar where he had met his ex, according to the police documents. He had distanced himself from his family in the months leading up and was getting increasingly more paranoid and believed 4 local businesses, that Schmenge's Bar and Grill, Just in Time Recreation, where the shootings took place, and Gowell's Market in Litchfield, and Mixer's Nightclub in Sabattis, He thought they were all broadcasting online that he was a pedophile. One of his sisters told police that he had been delusional since February 2023 after that bad breakup. And a brother told officers that he had started to believe specific people were out to get him and had been calling him a pedophile. That included the manager of Schmenge's, Joey Walker, who was one of the people who died that night. Maybe I need to clarify, but nobody was broadcasting that he was a pedophile. No one. There was no evidence he was a pedophile, just paranoid delusions. And the brother suggested it all started around the time he started wearing a hearing aid. Card also believed that his family was involved in the conspiracy. And it was his family who first identified him as the suspect once police had circulated a picture of a man entering the bowling alley last Wednesday. Roughly 2.5 hours after the first shooting, Card's sister contacted Lewiston police and made the identification. On the night of the shootings, his brother told police that he had been in a relationship with a person only identified as JC, and that the two had met at Schmenge's during a cornhole tournament. The brother said that ever since that relationship had ended and Card started wearing hearing aids, he had been saying crazy things, the affidavit states. We learned that Card's former girlfriend had 2 daughters that he took to Schmenge's to eat on occasion. That's when he felt people were looking at him negatively. As the urgent search for him began, a brother told police that he might go to Maine Recycling because he had an issue with another employee there this past spring. That is where he had worked for about 1.5 years until he left voluntarily earlier in 2023. Distance between Robert Card and his family had started to grow over the course of several months. After more than 2 days, he was eventually located, found deceased, on the property of his former employer, a recycling plant in Lisbon, Maine. In the time since, we have begun to piece together just how badly the institutions who are supposed to prevent events like this may have failed the people of Maine. Now, some of you listening may hear that statement and feel defensive. Based on everything I have seen in relation to this catastrophic event, there are so many questions. In May, members of Card's family contacted police saying they were concerned about his mental health, and he had 15 guns in his possession. In July, after a disturbing incident at a training facility at West Point in New York, Card spent 2 weeks at a mental health treatment facility there. In August, the Army determined that Card should have access to his weapons and ammunition restricted. In September, a reservist contacted police to say he had concerns over Card. He was worried that he might go to, quote, shoot up the Army Reserve facility in Saco. After hearing this, Saginaw County Sheriff issued an alert to law enforcement agencies statewide, noting Card was armed, dangerous, and was making violent threats. That alert was canceled on October 18th, just 1 week before the attack on 2 locations in Lewiston, Maine. The Bangor Daily News reported that Robert Card's New York mental health evaluation would not have triggered Maine's yellow flag law because he was put into protective custody out of state. That is a tragic realization. Imagine everything else that falls through the cracks. Now, I think most of us would agree that something should have been triggered for Card. It's always the hindsight that gets you. Experts have said, on more than one occasion, that Card's actions should have triggered Maine's yellow flag law, and cases less severe than Card's have led to just that. The state's yellow flag law, which came into effect on July 1st, 2020, can temporarily restrict an individual from possessing firearms if police place the individual in protective custody and have that individual undergo an evaluation by a medical professional, which can then lead to the police petitioning a judge to have that individual's firearms removed. And Maine's yellow flag law was designed to be a middle ground between gun rights advocates and gun control advocates. And it is therefore less sweeping than any other state's red flag laws, by which, in some cases, a relative can directly petition a court to have their family members' firearms seized. Now, this man was a U.S. Army reservist stationed in Saco. And according to the documents provided by Saginaw County Sheriff's Office, Card's unit, which contains several members of Maine law enforcement, was aware of and concerned about Card's erratic behavior and the violent threats he was leveling before the shooting. Though the state of Maine has taken some steps to keep guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them, Maine law does not require background checks on all gun sales. It makes it easier for prohibited purchasers to access guns, no questions asked. Maine does not have an extreme risk law, also known as a red flag law, that empowers families and law enforcement to prevent tragedies before they happen. And in 2015, the state repealed one of the few gun safety laws it had, allowing people to carry hidden, loaded guns throughout the state without a permit. Concealed carry. You know, you do a little reading about this stuff. It's helpful to know. Maine.gov. Firearm laws can be complex. It is the responsibility of each person holding a Maine concealed handgun permit to check with the state or jurisdiction they are traveling to determine whether that state honors Maine's permit and whether there are any restrictions or conditions imposed on out-of-state permits and the carrying of firearms. This is known as reciprocity, right? This discussion always goes to restricting gun access. We can't pretend America has a shortage of guns. We got them. And now we can make them. Ghost guns are a thing, but this isn't about that. High-capacity weapons are terrifying to most. And there is no way to know if any kind of gun restriction would have prevented what happened in Lewiston, Maine. And now, I know a lot of people who say, "You'll never take my guns." And you're right. No one's going to take your guns. That would have already happened. In a word, Newtown. But any and all good gun owners should agree that there is a massive responsibility in owning, caring for, and properly storing guns. Education is key, right? And if I'm being honest, I'm not even pro or con gun. I grew up in a home where they were like laying on the table. I stepped over them on the floor. I mean, that's not a brag. That's total irresponsibility. And without outing the person, someone in my household gave away one of those guns, and well, you gotta report that. What I am is pro not killing people. That should be a thing. I am also against wiping out lots of people in very short amounts of time. Is there a name for that? But I'll say something else honest. I shot guns, and it's fun. For sport. I don't shoot at anything living. I'm not into that. But I get it. I've got lots of friends who do lots of kinds of things. But I'm pretty sure they're not fucking assholes about it. I'm not here to preach about what you should and shouldn't believe. But what did authorities know, and when did they know it? There were checks on Robert Card. 2 local law enforcement chiefs told the Associated Press that an alert was sent in mid-September to watch for Card, who had made threats against his base and his fellow soldiers in Saco, Maine. But after attempts to find Card failed, law enforcement moved on. They said, "We couldn't find him." Saginaw County Sheriff Joel Merry, whose jurisdiction includes Card's home in Bowdoin, said the awareness alert was sent to every law enforcement agency in the state after his deputy conducted a welfare check of Card's home and was unable to find him. So what I've been able to deduce with my research is that in Saco, Maine, where the Army Reserve barracks are, they also added patrols for about 2 weeks, and Card never showed up. That is according to Saco Police Chief Jack Clements, as told to the Associated Press. When questioned about what came next, the county sheriff told the AP he couldn't recall if there was any follow-up because I don't have any reports in front of me. I'm willing to bet somebody has been reviewing those reports. Chief Clements defended his department to the alert about Card. He referred to it as a generic thing and said we had some report that this guy's made veiled threats. He added that search alerts are common and his department had given the alert about Card its due attention. Okay. On November 1st, 2023, Maine Governor Janet Mills announced intent to formally establish an independent commission to investigate the circumstances and the police response to the Lewiston shooting. The Maine Department of Public Safety Commissioner, Michael Shawshock, the man we saw in all of the press briefings, he said in a news conference that despite Card's history of mental illness, there was no record of Robert Card being involuntarily committed to a mental health facility. Just because there appears to be a mental health nexus to this scenario, the vast majority of people with mental health diagnoses will never hurt anybody. That's true, he said all that. But here's the other part. He was committed in New York, not in Maine. Several firearms were recovered in the search and the investigation of Robert Card. And the guns recovered were legally purchased. Remember, Robert Card did not have a criminal record. And as we learned, his hospitalization in New York did not trigger a Maine yellow flag. And if any background check was conducted, it would come up clean. When police located his abandoned car, inside they found a rifle and 2 firearms were discovered with Card's body. He was in a trailer at the Maine Recycling Corporation where he had once worked, where he left voluntarily. There were many reports that Robert Card was fired. That was not the case. He left on his own. A spokesperson for the Maine Attorney General's office confirmed to USA Today that Maine's yellow flag law is an alternative to red flag laws around the United States, which allow law enforcement and judges to remove an individual's access to firearms. As we know, Maine does not have a red flag law. So what has this done to the close community around Lewiston, Maine? It has been traumatizing beyond words. I talked to Bernadette, host of the podcast Murderific, the true crime podcast she hosted for several years until just recently, when she went on hiatus in June. Now, Bernadette lives in the town where Robert Card's car was found and where the search for him centered. I wanted to talk to her for a few reasons. She's as local as it gets, and she's very aware of all of it. And she is one of the true crime podcast people I met early on when I started, and she was always kind and always very supportive of me. We just had a conversation. Now that the first wave of trauma and chaos has passed for the people of the Lisbon and Lewiston area, what is the sense of what's going on a local level with folks now that the media trucks are pulling away?
Now that the story is over, basically, I feel like everyone is just in shock. Like it happened and it was terrifying and it was horrifying and it was sad. And now he's dead. The shock is still there. And I feel like a lot of people feel numb. And everyone that I talk to, everyone is talking about it nonstop. Because everyone knows everyone in Maine. And you could live in Fort Kent or you could live in Portland and someone knows somebody that was murdered that day, or somebody knows somebody's brother or sister, or even Robert Card's family. Everybody knows everybody in this state, and that's the truth. So I just feel like the shock is wearing off a little bit, and I feel very numb, actually.
That's a legitimate thing because I feel like that's something that people don't realize. They feel like, okay, well, this guy's been caught. It's over. We don't need to think about it anymore. But the ramifications of what's going to happen in that area, let's talk about all the businesses that were shut down for days, not to mention the 2 businesses where the shootings took place, a bowling alley, which I bet is hopping a lot of the time. I mean, this was a Wednesday night that this happened, and there was a room full of people. And you have a local bar that is probably full of regulars most of the time. I mean, that's going to be really difficult for these folks to put these things back together.
Yeah, I feel like Maine is one of those places other people would be like, oh, well, they're obviously going to shut down because that happened. Maine's not like that. These places will get it together and come back and not shut down on principle. They don't want evil to win. It's not who we are, and they won't shut down. But
tell me what it was like for folks. I mean, I know what it was like here. I'm in Massachusetts. I'm a New Englander. I love everything about Maine. We talk sometimes about maybe that's where we'll end up later on, eventually. But it's a place where there's a tremendous amount of locals and there are transplants. We know that.
yeah.
Tell me about, I know, I hear the stories when we're up there vacationing. We get the Massachusetts people are coming up and buying stuff. I'm like, yeah, that might be me.
They're ruining our state.
That might be me.
They're driving up the property values.
But I love it there because of all of these things. It's a special place, and it's full of people who just want to help each other. Like you said, by and large, everybody knows each other.
Yes.
So when this news broke out, I mean, we were collectively shocked as a region and a nation because stuff like this doesn't happen in Maine. It just doesn't happen like this in Maine.
Yeah, not yet, not until now.
Which shows what we're headed for as a society, you know?
Right. I mean, there were times where you would go to the movies and you'd look around and you're like, okay, something could happen, but it never had, not like that. And the suspect was, and it wasn't like, oh, you don't know where he is. He could be somewhere in the state. He literally could have been in my backyard.
That's right.
So,
and he kind of was.
Yes, he really was. When he was found about 2 miles from where I live. So when that happened that night, and then they were doing the searches, there were literally helicopters over my house at night. So you're sleeping with a police scanner. You're sleeping with a gun. You've got the news on. And I mean, talk about next door. Yeah.
When you first started to learn what was happening, what were people saying? You were in touch with folks, obviously, because it was business as usual for everybody. Everybody was at work doing their family things, going shopping. What was the sense of when this really hit? It was like, what, 6, almost 7 p.m.
Yeah,
on a
it happened
night?
that Wednesday night, and everything shut down for the next day. Everything. It was just shelter in place. People were so scared. Businesses were closed. LL Bean closed. So that should tell you something. That hardly ever happens, maybe 1 or 2 other times. And everyone was calling people to see if they were okay. People were calling and saying, are you okay? Do you know people that were injured? Everyone was calling everyone because the sense of community here is pretty large. And it was, I mean, I can't stress how terrifying it was. It really was. I still think I'm in shock. It was very traumatic and really scary. Just the fact that on Sunday, 1,000 people showed up at church for the victims, and 1,000 people, that's a lot in one place. The community here is really getting together and raising money for the people that were injured.
And there are a lot of people who are going to be recovering for a long time after this, physically and of course emotionally.
Right.
In addition to the 18 people who lost their lives, all of their associated family members, and then there are a number of people who were injured to varying degrees. It seems to me that people figured out who this perpetrator was pretty quickly. Yes, there were screen captures of this person. People figured it out almost immediately when they heard what was going on, that it was this person. Can you speak to that?
The police were notified about him in the months or the month before that something was going to happen. And I know the police tried to go to his house and he wasn't home. And I don't know if they gave up after that or what, but obviously a lot of red flags were missed. And also, instead of coming down really hard on the police, I think it's really hard when you know someone is having mental issues, you know something might happen, but you can't arrest somebody before something happens. So you can't come down too hard. Obviously, a lot of red flags were missed, and it seems like that happens over and over. So that's sad.
We know that much more has to be done with red flag and yellow flag laws. And I don't know enough about what those laws entail, but it's safe to say that some things were missed in this instance. And unfortunately, we have a lot of trauma as a result of it.
Well, there are no red flag laws in Maine.
None.
At all. In my head, if someone has been convicted of any sort of domestic abuse or a restraining order, they can't have a gun for a year.
Mhm.
If you, apparently the wording is if you're committed into a mental institution, then you wouldn't have a gun for a year.
Mhm.
To me, those are very common sense laws. It's not saying nobody can have guns. It's saying if these things happen for everyone else's protection, this person can't have a gun. And of course, obviously, you can go get a gun anywhere. Like, I get that. But you don't have a gun in your access, like immediate access in your home, because you wouldn't be allowed to. Even if we had a red flag law, that maybe it wouldn't have even affected him.
Mhm.
But obviously, laws are one thing, but there's a huge lack of mental health resources in our state, and it seems like everywhere, to be honest.
And you're right. And this is a person who, everything that I've read about him, a 40-year-old man who had spent 20 years in the military as a reservist. This isn't somebody, I believe, that saw any kind of active duty, so PTSD doesn't come into play in the instance of this person was in the front lines in Afghanistan. That's not the case with this person. Could they have experienced other traumas? They certainly could have. But there's no mental health support for somebody who's involved in the Army Reserves. I mean, where do we go with this?
There's a lack of mental health care. It's just a fact. It's not something the government is putting money into.
No.
And also, I don't know if you watched the public safety commissioner, all the times he gave speeches over the 3 or 4 days. He did mention, and I was really glad that he did, that most mentally ill people will never commit crimes. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to be a victim of a crime. And I really love that he pointed that out, because you can't just look at someone and be like, oh, they're mentally ill, take their guns away, because that's not the case.
No, you're absolutely right. I think all of the folks, the public facing folks during this, did an amazing job.
I agree.
I felt like they were very communicative. I think they were very honest with what was going on. This isn't really something public officials really want to have to talk about ever.
Right.
Obviously so. But I think they did a pretty great job with keeping everybody up to date because, and we know the nature of the internet fodder and armchair detectives, et cetera, and web sleuthing, that everybody wants to be, the super internet cop and go and try to solve cases, which is pathetic. We've been involved in this true crime thing for a long time, and it's dangerous.
Right.
It can be very dangerous for people. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, like, I really hope we don't have some like justice warriors out there that want to go and try to find this man on their own, because clearly he had proven that he was going to kill people and did, unfortunately, way too successfully.
And that he could have been anywhere, and hunting season started on Saturday, which is actually a huge thing in Maine.
Yeah,
and then you would have had all these hunters in the woods and a person in the woods. Oh my God. It would have been awful.
They were almost going to have to delay it, weren't they?
Yes.
Which have been horrible for a lot of people who plan on that.
Right.
So many outdoors people in that region of the state. There are a number of resources to support the folks, both businesses and the families of those who were injured and the families of those who were killed. I cannot implore enough on people to vet these places, because as what always happens is there's always someone trying to hustle money on the backs of someone else's tragedy.
I can definitely send you some links. I know there are a lot of GoFundMes right now that will go directly to the families. You can always donate blood, of course, because that helped a lot of people.
Folks who were killed, they come from all parts of the state. I think that maybe some people might be under the impression that these are all people that lived right in Lewiston. And I know the families were pretty adamant about not wanting necessarily to include the hometowns of some of the folks that passed away.
Yeah, I saw that too. I mean, I'm sure you don't want media knocking on your door to talk to you about things that were the most traumatic things that ever happened to you in your life. That's not helpful. In fact, today I saw on Facebook, I can't believe this. They were saying if you would like to send a card or a message to Robert Card's son, here
Oh.
is an address to do it, but they named him
Mm.
on Facebook. And I was like, what a nightmare. There's no common sense there.
Do you know much about his son?
I
Is he
know that he's
young?
like 13. That's all I know.
This is going to be a traumatic thing for that child to have to deal with in the coming weeks and months and years to realize all of this that has happened.
Robert Card's family, too. I believe they've been getting death threats, and they were nothing but helpful from
They
the
had
very
nothing.
beginning and before. And I can't imagine the pain they're going through also.
His family, as much as anyone else, wanted him to turn himself in, tried to inform people of some of the things that were going on with this guy.
Yeah, they definitely went to the police ahead of time. Yeah.
And it seems to me, based on some of the research that I have done up until now, that they were trying to flag him on their own, trying to indicate there's something going on here. And there was one story I recall reading, I don't remember where it was, one of the many publications, that a family member said, I try to remember the context of what they said, that when they heard what had happened, they kind of knew it was him.
Oh, so awful. Like your worst nightmare.
Yeah, because of the location, because of some of the details, they did the process of connecting all of those dots. So many hours passed where there was a manhunt. And unfortunately, there were a number of manhunts on the East Coast during this long weekend.
Yes, so I heard.
The Robert Card manhunt in the Lewiston, Maine area. There's another person at large right now in the Gardner, Mass area that I'm watching very closely, a man that allegedly murdered his wife.
Any updates on that?
Nothing. I'm trying to follow it. And I have a few folks that live in the town who are plugging in some information as things are made known to the locals. There's still nothing. So is this person gone? I think we are probably dealing with a similar situation as Robert Card, that the authorities are putting in some real search hours, but the likelihood of this person still being alive, I don't know. It's just like Robert Card. His car was found. They were thinking, oh, did he get away on a jet ski? Did he
on a boat?
On a boat? Was somebody waiting for him? Did someone pick him up? Did he arrange something? I don't think he did any arranging. I don't really think that there was much planning involved with this, really.
Yeah, I did notice in the video, he definitely had ammunition with him. But I think that may have been the amount of planning that he did, because it seems like I mean, we don't know for sure, but he parked his car, walked along the water on paths, and may have suicided that exact same night.
I think that probably was the case. And we know that there was a note he had written for, we believe, his son, with some personal details. We don't need to know what the note says.
No.
If that's something that was meant for a family member, we don't need to know. And I don't think that we need to press anybody on that, quite frankly.
No. Pretty basic information. His phone, passcode, his bank account numbers, and that's it.
Do you know, without having to reveal any personal stuff about the former partner, it's believed, and again, this is all stuff we may find answers to or we may never. There was a reported former girlfriend or a former partner who may have been targeted at one of those venues, which Robert Card had been, I'll say, a regular, for lack of a better term. Do we know any more information as to whether that partner may have been targeted, that there's an ex that exists somewhere.
Well, when I first started looking into it, I saw that there was a restraining order and that there were a couple ex-girlfriends that were afraid of him. And then the police said the only thing they found in his past records was an OUI. So maybe that's not true. But I mean, they are saying that he may have been targeting an ex-girlfriend. But they also said that he was fired from his job.
That's
and
right.
that wasn't really true. He wasn't fired, but he just didn't work there anymore.
Well, and if he's having a mental health crisis, we know that things start to fall away. People's ability to show up at a job regularly and work through the day, all of these things are affected. And, I do have compassion for somebody who is having a mental health crisis. I can't look at this situation and say, oh, poor guy. That's not really how I feel completely. I really do wish he got help. I really
Right.
do wish we didn't have 18 dead loved ones and 13 more injured ones or more. It's so much bigger than all of us.
Yeah, it's hard to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense.
That's right. These are the things I think about, and I think there are a lot of people like me. So we've had school shootings. We've had grocery store shootings. We've had church shootings. We've had synagogue shootings. We've had movie theater shootings, mall shootings. Now we've had bowling alley shootings and your local bar shootings.
We're not safe.
In Maine, quiet town Maine, and big city Minneapolis, and small town, Oklahoma. It's anywhere and everywhere.
Yes. And Maine's not excluded.
No. I'm not the kind of person who looks at everything as, everything's bad news. I try to be positive. I try to see the good in things. But at the very same time, I get really nervous for people. I get really nervous for parents putting their children on a school bus. And I get really nervous for all of us, for leaving the house. For some people, a COVID lockdown was great and magical, and they learned how to, bake bread. But for a lot of other people, a COVID lockdown was dangerous.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Mental health wise, addiction wise.
If you were in a bad relationship with somebody, you couldn't get away from them.
Yeah.
There's a lot at stake. You really did hit the nail on the head when we talk about things like, where are the mental health resources? I don't know where they are. I know that we know that the United States of America has money for the war machine.
Yeah, that's never going to stop. The government's priority is not its citizens, and they've shown that time and time again, and we're suffering, and a lot of people are suffering.
Clearly, there's some responsibility to be had in what has happened with the Robert Card story. We can finger point all day long, and it's not going to change the fact that this man felt in his mania or whatever he was experiencing, going in and shooting people was the answer or the solution or what he was being directed to do by his voices. We're probably never going to know everything that happens. We hear stories about, I remember reading in a number of publications where he had severe hearing problems and he had hearing aids, and that increased the voices that he was hearing. I'm like, there was probably some psychosis.
It's just hard for me to understand how, if it wasn't a mental health issue, it does seem a lot of times whenever there is a mass shooting or a spray shooting, it's a white male who cannot handle life's issues. But it's not women going out and shooting people. It's not, obviously women kill people. I'm just saying, when there's a mass shooting, 99% of the time, it's a white male who got fired, lost his girlfriend, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of dealing with that or getting mental health, they take a bunch of people out with them. And it's very hard to understand. I don't understand.
It is horrifying. And I'm with you on that. Unfortunately, statistically, it is generally a middle-aged white person.
Yeah.
Man, there's some research, deeper research that needs to be done. in this area.
Yeah.
And so we need to figure out what the hell is going on to
Right.
try
But
to remedy some of this stuff.
I mean, this keeps happening over and over, and you can talk about the guns or politics or mental health,
Yeah.
but I feel a little bit helpless about it. But all you can do is love the ones around you and support your community. And it really starts there. And because the government's not going to help us,
Mhm.
and we have to do something ourselves in a small way to change anything.
Mhm.
And that's the only hope
Yeah.
that I can come up with in this situation.
And that's the true beauty of community, is that really the folks around us are going to be the ones that are going to be more helpful.
Yes.
In a community like Lewiston and the surrounding areas, no one ever anticipated that this was going to happen on a Wednesday night out, going to the bowling league, or what else? They were playing another game, right?
Cornhole.
Cornhole. Cornhole. No one would imagine on a Wednesday night cornhole league that those folks wouldn't be coming home again that night. And it
No.
seems absurd to even say it out loud. A Wednesday night cornhole game was the last thing somebody did. It's
Yeah.
horrifying and truly sad. I'd like to think that we can prevent this from happening again, but really the only way we're going to be able to prevent it is by talking about it.
Correct. Yes.
And, you always hear it. You always hear it after something like this happens. Well, let's not talk about politics. It's all political. What we're going to do about it, I don't know. I don't know. We can vote until our hands fall off, which is important. I'm not saying not to vote. Voting is very important, but we need to think about who those people are that we're putting into office.
Right.
The common sense things that you hit the nail on the head. We're not even asking for stuff that sounds radical and crazy. We're
No.
asking for some common sense stuff that really everybody across the board can agree on.
Yeah. The smallest changes would actually save a lot of lives.
Thinking about Maine being a state where there's a lot of sport hunters, there's a lot of sportsmen and women. I know for a fact that people who are gun owners, they want other people to be responsible gun owners.
Of course.
No doubt in my mind about it. The people who are common sense gun owners want people to use common sense with their guns. This situation with Robert Card in Lewiston, Maine, and murdering 18 people, it's just none of those things.
I feel like it could have been prevented.
And there's so much I don't think we're ever going to know about what led to this.
Right. But it ended very badly for him and his family and many other people.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that he didn't go to another location. He went to 2.
Oh, I know.
Was he thinking about more? I'm just glad that it stopped where it stopped.
Right.
The areas where you are, Lewiston, Lisbon, Bowdoin, is probably not too terribly far from where he was found, right?
Yeah, pretty close.
There must be memorial plans for the folks coming up. There's going to be, unfortunately, a whole lot of funeral services to come in the next several weeks.
Lots of memorials around the town, people hanging up pictures. And, you're hearing things like Lewiston Strong, and people love each other. And
I look at a similar situation when I was watching what was happening in the Lewiston area, how the lockdown came and people respected it as people would. It wasn't completely unlike what happened in my area when the Boston Marathon bombers were discovered. It wasn't even in Boston proper when they located and identified these 2 guys. It was in the Cambridge and Watertown area, which is, a handful of miles away from where the bombing happened.
I think the police had the same determination in Maine as they did in Boston, because I remember my sister went to she had a concert in Boston during the Boston bombings, and the police were like opening her trunk and looking through her trunk and things like that. And they must have been everywhere. That must have been terrifying for you.
It was scary once we learned that they found them and they were chasing them, and then they were having a gunfight on the street of Watertown. It was horrifying. And we were all collectively, much like your community in Southern Maine, we were like, get those motherfuckers.
Right.
We'll stay home. We'll stay home. You go and do what you got to do. We'll get out of your way. We'd do it again. That was terrifying because they really were hell-bent on killing more people. They had already proven by then that they were ready to kill. And they were, as we understand it, they were on their way to the next thing. We believe that those two men were going to go to New York City and try to pull some shit in downtown Manhattan.
Wow.
Similarly to what they did in Boston. And they stopped them. One of them died, and one of them is in prison for the rest of his life. He's very young. And he could very well see an execution. I don't know if that'll happen in our lifetime, but he got the death penalty. They took it away and they gave it back.
Oh, I didn't know they gave it back.
Yeah. The feeling in people in Massachusetts definitely understood.
Yeah.
People in the Boston area definitely understood what was going on and what was at stake, because you had somebody you had a rogue shooter on the run. There was no way to know in those hours immediately after the shootings whether he was going to go after more people. There was no way to know.
Right.
And the right thing to do is what they did. Everybody just stay put for right now. We got some shit we got to do. And they figured it out. I mean, very shortly after they lifted the stay-at-home order, they found his body. And they may have found him before that. They just didn't let us know that, right?
Well, they said they found him on the third time they looked. I guess it's a pretty big property. We can't in Maine say never us anymore, It's everywhere.
It's overwhelming when you think about it like that.
It's
overwhelming when you think of, people who have lived through this kind of traumatic experience and the things that this wisdom and understanding that they possess against their wishes. Nobody wants to be a part of that club. Nobody wants to be like, well, I experienced that. Unfortunately, I know what you're going through. And let me tell you what worked for me. Nobody wants that experience at all.
No.
It's part of a club nobody wants to be a part of. And I say that when I'm referring to, various cases of, missing loved ones. Nobody wants to be in this club of, my loved one went missing. What happened to your loved one? It's this bonding, this, trauma bonding that it's so unfair that people even have to know what that feels like. It's truly sad and disappointing in thinking that, there's a whole bunch of traumatized, there were little kids in there, lost family members and parents and little kids trying to figure out, where their loved ones are. And these are the things that come from this.
Yeah. I always think of you'll hear 18 victims. Well, no, that's not true. It's the circle around those 18 and then the circle around that and then the circle around that.
Absolutely right. It's absolutely right. And, and think about the first responders and what they have to work through. It's outrageous. Well, thank you for chatting with me.
Yeah. Thanks for checking on me.
You have your family close by, right? You have a good support team around you.
Yeah.
You born and raised there, right? Is that your
No,
home?
I've been born and raised in Maine, but I've lived everywhere in Maine. I've lived in Waterville and Bangor and Lisbon, and I've lived all over Maine. Good state.
For me, it's a peaceful place. I'm sorry that experiences like this ruin that peaceful feeling for people.
Like I said, Maine's a strong state, and we're just going to try to work through this and come out stronger, because that's all you can do is to go on.
And that's what's special about New Englanders. Yes. I say that a lot about just, more so the region where we are, sort of Massachusetts and north. Although, you can include Connecticut in there, even the part that likes the Yankees. Sorry, Connecticut, I love you. But I say we're a crusty people, and it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with like our weather-worn souls that people don't quite understand what that means. It's very cold here and our skin gets really chapped, and but it does something to our hearts and our souls that makes us stronger. And it really is true. We're just a different kind of people, and people don't really understand it so much.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, they got caught up in like the accents and the stuff like that, which is all part of our beauty.
Right.
But it's New Englanders are special people. I don't really think I ever want to leave. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. It has the best people. We have a different understanding about things that doesn't translate in other parts of the country. It's just something special.
Right.
So love to everybody in Lewiston and Lisbon. And there's a lot of folks that have a lot of physical healing to do, and a lot more folks that have some emotional healing. And you have a great force of people. And unfortunately, these are the kinds of stories that we'll be retelling for a long, long, long time. Remember when,
Right.
Thank you for your time. It was great to just chat with you. Let's make sure we keep in touch. And
all right, take care.
there are a number of ways to support the victims of the Lewiston, Maine shootings. There's help for the victims and families, and support for mental health. I will link them all to the show description and the episode notes. A community resilience center will open at 184 Main Street in Lewiston on Monday, November 13th. There's the Central Maine Medical Center Compassionate Care Fund for trauma response and support, the Lewiston-Auburn Area Response Fund, the City of Lewiston Support Fund, and many, many more that I will share with you. Now, it's most important to center the victims of this story. 18 people between the ages of 14 and 76, with pasts and presents and dreams and plans and goals and futures. Ron Moran, 55, Peyton Brewer Ross, 40, Joshua Seal, 36, Brian McFarlane, 41, Joe Walker, 57, Arthur Strout, known as Artie, 42, Max Hathaway, 35, Stephen Vozella, 45, Tom Conrad, 34, Mike Delorier, 51, Jason Walker, 51, Trisha Aslan, 53, Bill Young, 44, and his son Aaron, 14, Bob and Lucy Violet. Bob was 76, Lucy was 73. They were married for almost 50 years. Bill Brackett, 48, and Keith McNear, 64. Keith was only visiting Maine. He's from Southern Florida. There is that adage, time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. As the days and weeks go by, distance will grow between our hectic day-to-day and these stories. But for the families and the loved ones of these people, their lives are going to be very different. Thank you for listening. I will post links and information at crimeofthetruestkind.com and in the show notes. Follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind. And maybe I'll see you Thursday night for our first live and in-person meetup at Off Cabot in Beverly, Massachusetts. And yes, please, lock your goddamn doors.